By the time Oliver had turned back around to deal with Charlie, he was nowhere to be seen. He had seized the moment, but at the price of being seen as the others pointed towards the icy stairwell. Oliver frowned before signalling with a wave of his hand, giving chase like a pack of rodents, scrambling over the handrail and glancing down as Charlie hastily ran out of sight, delving into the horde of oncoming villagers with their overflowing baskets of goodies and oblivious to the mystical creature that had just flown dangerously overhead, flapping away from the village with its entourage of youngsters, just a few blocks behind, in hot pursuit, scuttling along the market stalls and weaving in and out of shoppers, narrowly avoiding collision as they stepped out into the cold, festive street. Charlie came to a halt and clung on to the corner of the market stand, glancing back at his pursuers as they scrambled out of the crowd, snowballing to the floor in search of Charlie as he made his daring escape. His legs had begun to tire and ache, but his heart empowered him onwards as he picked up the pace to his own discomfort, racing down a dim-lit side alley, with his sights set on the night sky as the turquoise glow strayed into the distance, towing Charlie forward with every heavy flap of its enchanting wings. The pathway was free of ice. Snow had begun to melt against the corners of the brickwork as Charlie made a point of reverting his gaze, checking back on the cobblestones that lay ahead of him as he followed the direction of the winged creature that was now disappearing beyond the distant chimney stacks. Where the energy faded, so did the guiding light, returning the narrow streets into twilight once more, suppressing Charlie's ability to see as he stepped out from the alley and into the centre of the Vinemore courtyard. Here, the odd-shaped benches looked like gravestones from afar, and the lack of lighting wasn't exactly helping as he held out his hands to feel his way towards the middle of the opening, where he knew a rather tall and beautiful oak tree stood. It had been there all his life, and a few lifetimes before that. It was a magnificent, peaceful tree. Charlie could tell it apart from the simple touch. Its grain was unlike any he had studied before, so as he bumped his snout against the solid bark and wrapped his arms around its trunk, he knew he was headed in the right direction. Even its sap smelt like no other. It was natural and fresh, much like the crystallized spell that was whistling through the long, spindly branches of the tree. The boy continued on his way, guided by what was left of the shards of moonlight rays as they softened the sight of oncoming foliage and shrubbery that leant out from their resting places like the risen dead, who commonly rose within Charlie's nightmares, but he was certain they didn't exist, as he pushed aside his fears and broke his way past the frozen greenery that was blocking his path. There was no sign of Oliver and his followers. This part of the village seemed unusually deserted, as Charlie nervously wondered what the time could have been, disregarding the watch that was strapped around his wrist, because truth be told, he knew his parents would offer some extra allowances. It was Christmas Eve after all, and they'd be busy around the house preparing for the festivities that Christmas Day would bring. Another 30 minutes wouldn't hurt, Charlie decided, as he broke into a comfortable jog, observing the snow-veiled vehicles and weary labourers closing up shop as he passed on by, sporting a heartwarming smile, while the raw adrenaline and excitement raced about him, prompting him to catch the back of the turquoise trail that sparkled in the sky up ahead. Charlie leapt. His legs bounced like springs along the frozen pavement, slipping and sliding, dashing and weaving around the statue pedestrians as they flocked from one window to another, glaring at all the gifts and jewellery that sat seductively in their luxurious velvet cradles, brainwashing the typical human minds with their elegant charm. They sighed intently, dazzled by the shop display as Charlie pushed his way past, mistaking Mr. Occamy for his shadow as he stepped out from behind the pharmacy porch and into the path of Charlie, who was beyond the point of return as he collided with the man, knocking the brown paper bag from his hand and crashing at his feet. "Ouch!" Charlie remarked, rubbing his hand against the back of his head, which was thankfully cushioned by the heavy knit hat. "Where are you headed in such a hurry? Does your mum know you're this side of the village?" asked Mr. Ockamy, as he knelt down beside Charlie to make sure he was okay, disregarding the medication that was sprawled all over the pavement in little plastic bottles. "I'm sorry, mister. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I was just chasing the bird. Didn't you see it?" he asked, reaching for the bottles that rattled as he dropped them back inside the brown paper bag. "I didn't. What did this bird look like?" "It was enormous. Its wings were the size of a house, Mr. Ockamy." Charlie's eyes lit up as he painted the image of the enchanted bird back against his mind. "It made the sky sparkle with stars of turquoise," he added, as he climbed back onto his feet. "I shouldn't really let it get away. I was right on its tail. Might never get the chance to see it again." Mr. Ockamy smirked. "You enjoy yourself, Charlie. Just don't do anything or go anywhere silly," he advised, as he picked the paper bag off the ground and ruffled Charlie's hat. As the boy scurried away, the tall, slender man stood observant at one with his responsible instinct of being a parent, just making sure the coast ahead looked safe and clear enough for Charlie before he turned back towards his home, clutching tightly onto the paper bag and pulling his scarf up around his mouth. He had better look after himself, he thought silently, as he traipsed his way up the village through the heavy downpour of icy flakes. Robin Ockamy was a pharmacist. He had built quite the reputation in and around the village of Vinemore, making it his sole duty to aid and assist the unwell to the best of his unprofessional ability. Ockamy had his own concoctions, experiments that were frowned upon by most, but there was always the select few who simply couldn't get enough, like an unhealthy addiction. It kept the pains at bay where all else failed. It was a necessity that could no longer live without. Besides, relying on a drug was far more easier than attempting self-discipline. But while stocks thinned and Christmas Day drew near, the users were left to other means of obtaining them, ways that forever put Robin's life in danger as he resorted to the shadows, disguising his face with the lip of his scarf. Robin Ockamy was quite a distinct man, tall, slender, with slim-fitting tweed coats that fell to the knees. He was the hay bale on a mountain of needles. His shiny brown brogues twinkled under the rays of moonlight, and his slicked dark hair shined like a shimmering river on a summer's day. But he couldn't risk a day without the medication. No matter how blatant his image appealed, he had to get home. Kirsten was relying on him. The alley seemed clear at first, but as Robin continued, he sensed as if someone was following him. He could almost feel their determination breathing down the back of his neck as he picked up his pace, knocking aside the leaves and branches, arriving at the courtyard where a thin layer of snow had begun to settle peacefully. The village was silent for a moment as Robin came to a halt, stood beside the oak tree, looking back in the direction he had come, but no one was there. It must have been his imagination. "I'm going mad," he confirmed, turning into the path of a dirty, short man whose face remained sheltered by darkness. Robin gave a gasp in shock. I'm sorry, I didn't see you there," he stuttered, stepping back towards the tree, carefully drawing the bag of medication towards his chest. "You know what I'm after. Hand it over," the man yelled, still hidden by the shadows being cast by the moon. "You know I can't do that." "Pig! I said hand it over," he repeated, becoming more and more aggressive in nature. If you don't step back, I'm warning you, I will..." "You'll what? What are you going to do, pharmacist?" Robin took a breath as the vile man snatched away the brown paper bag from his possession, spitting down at the ground he stood upon as he stepped back to peer inside. "Who's all this for, then? There's tons in here," the man asked, glaring up at Robin as he stood patiently, ready to knock the thief into the next Christmas, and the one after that. "It doesn't matter now, anyway. It's all coming home with me," he added, just as another silhouette figure appeared, descending down a flight of slabs and headed in their direction. "Oi, you! Yes, you!" the mysterious figure called, distracting the attention of the thief, who was suddenly victim to a swinging fist as Robin knocked him to the ground. He felt like a sack of potatoes, knocked out cold. Robin quickly knelt down beside him to make sure he was still alive, as the third figure arrived at the scene, panting, short of breath. It was Oliver's dad, Kenneth, armed with his wooden cane and military greatcoat, complete with brass buttons. "Robin? It couldn't have been anyone else. Only you can pack a punch like that. Is he okay?" "He's alive. I guess that's always a good sign," Occamy chuckled, sliding his arm from his sleeve and placing his coat over the thief's unconscious body. "You've got a heart of gold, you have. Just a duty of care, Kenneth. He's not waking up any time soon, that's for sure. Besides, that's a bundle of fluff. That bundle of fluff was on its way out. It's going to be another cold night." Kenneth watched as Robin gathered together the medicine and placed it inside the battered paper bag. It was much easier in just his white shirt and golden waistcoat, far more manoeuvrable. He collected his belongings and sprung back onto his feet, meeting Kenneth's wary gaze. "Anyhow, what brings you this way?" asked Occamy, with an eyebrow raised from curiosity. He was quite a distance from home, with a blatant lack of breath as he continued to pant, placing his hands around his hips. "A sighting. I don't suppose you saw it." Robin was instantly reminded of Charlie, who had run straight into him, claiming he had been following a giant bird. Could it have been the very same one? "A bird?" Robin asked, with sarcasm in his tone, to which Kenneth's eyes widened even further. He looked worried and fearful as his grip tightened around the handle of his cane that was firmly pressed into the snow. "You saw it?" Kenneth asked, with concern overwhelming him, taking a step closer to Robin, whose face fell pale. No, I bumped into little Charlie. He said something about a bird with wings the size of a house. Probably just in a world of his own. You know what children are like." Kenneth's hand immediately eased from around the cane. "Where was he headed?" "Just back past the shop. You know, my place, right?" Kenneth smiled behind his bushy moustache. "Of course. Thank you, Robin. You have no idea how important this is, but I'm sure one day I'll be able to explain it all." Kenneth suddenly took off, darting towards the alley and raising a hand to Robin, signalling his farewell before vanishing beyond the snow-veiled foliage. "Very bizarre," Robin chuckled to himself. He pulled his bag of medicine tightly to his chest once more as Flake swept in, riding the bitter breeze of Christmas as the day itself drew all that closer, reeling the father of one back towards the warmth of his home that waited upon a hilltop, looking over the village of Vinemore and the mountains of Shoulders Heath, away from the weird goings-on that even on this night, Christmas Eve of all nights, it never felt more apparent.